everyone. I hope you have a fantastic day. I am your host. Welcome to Junior's Book Club. And today we are reading review of Book 2, Dear America. On our first video, we were talking about the first series, Dear America, Our Strange New Land by Elizabeth Baker. Now we're reading and doing a book review of Book 2, Dear America, The Starving Time by Elizabeth Baker's Diary, 1609 through 10. And today I have finished the whole book of Book 2, The Starving Times. And when I was reading it today, it was very interesting, and I thought some parts were pretty funny, and of course there were some parts in this book that were very sad. And when I was reading through her diary, it was pretty interesting though. It was pretty, there was some stuff that were kind of funny and sad. And I wrote some notes here so that I could tell you what I thought about this book. And while I was reading, here, let me get my reading glasses. Alright, and I will tell you my review about this book. Dear America, The Starving Times, Book 2, Jamestown, Virginia, 1609. Elizabeth was watching the ships. Okay, when I was reading it at the first beginning, Elizabeth was watching the ships from where she was, because her friend Jessie and John Smith were going back to England. John Smith was going back to recover, and Jessie was going back because her father didn't want to stay where they were because of the disease and the hardships. And in the first series, she was watching the ships going away and disappearing from the horizon, and she was deeply heartbroken because she was never going to see her friend Jessie ever again, and she was heartbroken about John Smith, leaving as well. And through the first series, she considered John Smith as a friend, and so Elizabeth was feeling alone, and she had no one to talk to in the village, and most of the time she was feeling depressed and sad. And she even went to the secret hiding place, which was the well, where her and Jessie would talk and gossip. And Mary happened to see her there, and Elizabeth was a little skeptical about it because she was afraid that Mary was gonna be mean to her, and that was not the case. But before I discuss that, Elizabeth and Jessie really didn't like Mary because she was in love with John Bridger. Yeah, John Bridger. But in that, it was not that case. Mary was a good girl, and she really did like Elizabeth, and Elizabeth felt kind of bad for disliking her. And then, according to what she said in her journal, she got to be careful before she judged people. And later on, Elizabeth and Mary became good friends, and Mary's about 4 years older than her, and Elizabeth, she's about 9 years old, I believe. And throughout the story, her and Mary have been hanging out for a good while in the story. They've been through a lot together, and they share stories with each other, and they had their good times and bad times. And throughout the pages that I was reading, according to what Elizabeth had wrote in her journals, she would write about the Indians sometimes, how the colony was enemies with the Indians, and she wrote in her journal right here and says, November 3rd, 1609. 1609. John was very fair to the Indians and to the people in the village, but now that he is gone, and to return to England, Gabriel Archer and the several other leaders of the group in the colony were cruel and unfair to the Indians, and the Indians became very hostile with those group because the reason why the Indians were very hostile with the colony and the leaders because they were stealing their food, their gardens, and their corn. And later, that's when the Indians started killing some of these men from there. And later on, it kind of got real dangerous out of the front, as they call their living quarters. And so Elizabeth and the other colonists had to fend for themselves. They had to take care of themselves because the Indians were not available at that time for them because of the hostile between them and the leaders. And there was a shortage of food during that time. Since the Indians were not available, it was hard for the colony to, it was hard for the colony to save some food. So there was some shortage at the storehouse, and people were starving and they were starting to get sick during that time. And some of the leaders were not that good to to provide for them. So some of the family members would have to gather and fed from themselves. And during the story, in the middle of the story, Elizabeth's father and her went into the woods, but they didn't want to take Elizabeth because how young and little she was. But she decided to go. So her father actually took her to the woods and and helped out to check before to watch out for the Indians. And pretty interesting though. He brought a lot of food, but it was only for him and his family, enough to be for weeks. And he brought some fish and some corn and cornmeal, and to last for a good while for Elizabeth, for her, and for his for Elizabeth, the mother, and her baby sister Abigail. And they had a good meal and a good feast. And when they went to bed, one of the thieves broke into their house and stole their food. And Elizabeth was very angry, and that she said that she felt like she wanted to boil. And of course, the colonists saw, and Elizabeth thought it was one of the Bridger brothers that had stole the food. And Elizabeth, according to her journal, she said that she hated that family because they were lazy and they didn't want to work, so they stole people's food. But the father, her father told her not to blame them so easily because they don't know it was them. And um, and and it was most likely it was them, the Bridger brothers, the Bridger families. But like her father agreed, he should have shared the food instead of keeping it to themselves. And and there's some pretty funny stuff that I have read in the story though. There were some funny things that I have read, and like um there was a day that Elizabeth was reading, was clean, like well, anyways, I wrote some notes so that I don't have to go through the book. November 10th, 1609. This was what Elizabeth had wrote in her journals. Beth's mother, or I'll say it in my own way, but what I wrote in my notes during the book, Beth's mother complained about her talking foolishly or talking too much. She only says what comes, but Elizabeth says what comes to her brain, which means whatever comes to her brain, she just says it out loud without just thinking. And here in her journal, she speaks harshly about Mistress Bridger, how she can be stout and selfish and mean. Elizabeth was in her house cleaning the pots in the kitchen, and Mrs. Bridger happened to be right there watching her, and Elizabeth was very uncomfortable because she was afraid that Miss Bridgers was gonna scold her, which means I guess hit her or say something mean. And outside the windows, watching her clean the pots. And Elizabeth had a bad feeling that she was going to scold her, like it said in her journal. And in here in my notes, but Miss Bridger asked her what she was doing, and Beth, she had to smart mouth her in a way, disrespect her in a way, by saying she was. It is what Elizabeth said. She was painting a picture in the pot, and the reason why she said that, because knowing that she was washing her cleaning the pots, and Elizabeth felt like she was asking a dumb question what she was doing after she was seeing that. So that's why Elizabeth said that. To me, I thought that was funny because I thought that was funny what she said. A little bit of sarcasm. It reminded me of what Dorothy Sporgan said in The Golden Girls, being sarcastic. And okay, and and Mrs. Bridger, after Elizabeth had said that to her, Mrs. Bridger didn't take that very well. She complained to her that she complained to Elizabeth that she was gonna go tattle on her parents, and she actually did. She did complain to her parents, and then the later throughout the day, her father was not too thrilled of Elizabeth disrespecting an elder. But Elizabeth's father, he did not yell at her. It's according to what her journal said, that it was very rare for him to yell at her. But like she wrote, oh, and I forgot to mention, guys, she wrote secret codes in her journal that, just in case that somebody would read her journals or the Bridger boys would steal her diary and read it, she would put, a full sentences close together that they want to know what it meant, which was her personal opinion or her personal thoughts, which I thought was pretty clever. I'll show you, which I thought it was pretty clever though. And she put it right there on the secret code above her note, above under her notes. She said, "I am not sorry." She put the sentences together that they wouldn't understand what it is. I thought that was pretty funny what she said to Mrs. Bridger, Bridger. I am painting a picture in the pot, which was pretty funny though. Well, she had it coming though, but I would probably done the same thing. And and um and later on in the story, Elizabeth's friend Mary, she was one day they were talking with each other about, well, Mary, she's boy crazy, and Elizabeth is not really too crazy about that, but she did mention that she was in love with John Bridger. And Elizabeth really does not like John Bridger. She doesn't really like the family. And she wrote in her notes that she would rather be a splinter woman, which I know what that means. And but then one day later on, Mary came crying because John did not meet her there at the whale. And she said that she was going to forget about marrying him and all that crazy stuff from back then. And Elizabeth wrote in her notes that she would rather die than marrying him, which I don't blame her. And and throughout the whole story, people were starving to death there during the village. Winter came along, and then it was very hard to get food during that time because they did not become friends with the Indians. The leaders were not knowing what they were doing, and supposedly I don't know who's the name of that family, but a group of family have left the front of the village and went off on their own. And then from what I read, they were never heard again. And Gabriel Archer and some of the leaders have left the village to go find food, but then I never heard it. I don't know what happened. It doesn't say what happened to Gabriel Archer, the man that Elizabeth did not like. And several others were injured because of the Indians. And the other group were killed by the Indians. And food was food was getting scarce during that time because people were not hunting, and in winter it was pretty hard to catch fish because the rivers were frozen, and people were getting sick. And Elizabeth's baby sister Abigail, she was starving to death. And during this whole story, Pocahontas was not present around them anymore, and Elizabeth had the courage to go find Pocahontas, even though her father said for her not to find her. And Elizabeth did what she had to do anyways. When she left the front of the call of the village, she was getting a little sick herself because of the cold, because of the bitter cold. So she was gone for 5 days. But when she was going, she slept in the cave, and out of nowhere there was a piece of bread, and she thought she was dreaming, but she took that bread and she ate some, even though her and her friend Mary were saving food for her, for her to go all to go find Pocahontas. And Elizabeth kept going on her journey, and then later she slept in the log. And according to a read in the story, two Indians were watching her, one tall one short one. And she was kind of, but she already knew she already knew one of them, and they knew her. And she was so happy because they thought they were going to take her to Pocahontas, and because she wanted Pocahontas to help her with the people and the food, because there was people who were dying in the village. While they were taking her, Elizabeth was very sick. She was starting to get the flu because of the bitter winters. But after she woke up, the Indians were carrying her. They took her back to her colony, not to the Indian village. And Elizabeth, according to her notes, she was so angry that she hit the ground with her fist. And but she was sick. She had a fever, and then they lay her down into the. She doesn't even remember when she went back into the village because she was so sick that she couldn't remember anything. And she wrote in her journals that she was sick for some time and she didn't see her mother there at the house. And her father was taking care of her, and a neighbor was watching the baby uh, until until Elizabeth gets better. But her mother was at the sick house taking care of people, but which was not the case. And then Elizabeth disobeyed her father, and she went to the sick house to go see what was wrong. And her friend Mary was there too. And Elizabeth's mother, she was not taking care of the sick. Her mother was sick herself. She was dying. And Mary was taking care of the sick, and then Elizabeth, she was there, but her father was kind of angry at her for being there because she needed to recover. And her father said in the journal that he didn't want to leave her, but Elizabeth stayed, so her father left her there to be with the mother. And she was, attending her mother, trying to nurse her back to health. And like I was saying, um, her mother was sick, and Elizabeth was worried that she was gonna die, and she was trying to help and nurse the sick people. And she saw one of her guy friends there, Francis, and she was talking to him. And when he was talking to him, he looked straight up to the ceiling. That he said he saw something, and Elizabeth looked up, and he still kept on staring at the ceiling straight up ahead. And that's when Elizabeth realized that he was gone. He died. And according to what her journal said, that they had to bury 10 people there. And the next, on March, I think it was on March 24th, she said in her journals that her mother had passed away. She didn't make it through the sickness. And it was a terrible year for her, a terrible new year. And and um and then later, long story short, Elizabeth and Mary were there, comforting each other because Mary's mother had passed away out of nowhere. According to her notes, that her mother felt unwell and she went to go lay down, but when she laid down the next day, she passed away. And Elizabeth was there thinking, what kind of sickness that it makes you die out of nowhere? And when they were there at the village, or I mean outside the village, they were near the ocean, and then both of them saw a ship coming, and they thought they were dreaming or something, they were seeing things, but no, it was actually a ship coming. I think it was two or three, if I'm not mistaken. And they were both so happy because that time of spring, that's when Caleb was coming, and her twin brother, and and um and she was so happy that Caleb was coming, and the only thing that was sad was that both of their mothers had passed away, and he was gonna be heartbroken. And like I read in the story, here, and Elizabeth was so excited about the ships coming, and she wrote this: "Summer is upon us. The gates to the front are always open now. We wander freely and out. We no longer fear the Indians. What is left to fear? There is only death. I think we have to become used to that. But Mary and I still talk. I have a friend, and we still dream. Yes, we do. Mary's dream of marrying, and I dream of my Caleb coming. And I dream of Mama. I wonder why Mary seldom speaks of her mothers. It is because she is older. Do you not grieve so much when you are 13 or 14? I am only 9. I think I will grieve for the rest of my life." And right here, I know that was not the one, but right here, Jude 10, 16:10. Could it be? Could it be? Or am I dreaming? Mary and I sit by the river. I know there are sails from. As I was reading, um, huge sails were dreaming, and I sit by the river, and I knew there were sails from upriver. I saw them, huge sails of white billows in the winds, and then the mist came down, and they were gone. But for a moment they were there, were they not? Perhaps I am dreaming, but Mary saw them too. Perhaps we are dreaming the same dream. And a few moments later, I close this book, and I open this book, and I pick up my pen. I sit down. When I write for the mist to clear, Mary and I clutched one's hands together, and Mary says it is real, and then says food. I say Caleb, and she says raisins, and etc. etc. That's when the ship from England was coming, and they had a new leader on the ship that mentions here. I think it was a Spanish leader, and his name is Lord de la Warren. And Caleb was in the ship, and then he came down, racing down to see Elizabeth, and they were both happy. They embraced each other, and that's when Elizabeth and the father broke the news to him that the mother had passed away, and of course he cried and grieved for her. And according and they brought a lot of wonderful supplies from England, food, supplies, good stuff that would last them for a good long time. New clothes, new shoes, ribbons, everything they had. And Elizabeth was happy. And supposedly that they were going to move to a new village, but they decided to stay there. And not only that, from the supplies, and there was new people coming from the ship, men and women, children, anything, everything. And with Gabriel Archer and the others, nobody knows exactly what happened. Some of them think that they were slaughtered by the Indians, and nobody knows for sure. And Elizabeth really didn't care about Gabriel Archer, and she mentions in her journals the Bridger boys had all had died from the sicknesses, and Miss Bridger was the only one who was left, and the others survived. So according to what I notes, I think they buried 10 or 14 people because some of them have died from the plague. And after I have read, she wrote in her last notes, P.S. Oh, and after I've read that, that shows you that it was a happy ending. Caleb got to meet his baby sister and the new land. According to what I read in the notes, the historic notes, 1607, London Company in England sent an expedition to America with the express purpose of settling there and finding good materials and send back to England. The reason why they sent ships back over there, this all sounds familiar in the movie Pocahontas, because they wanted to see if they could find gold. But that was not in that case. They did find good stuff, but it was not gold. And the Spanish person from Bermuda, De La Warren, was the new leader of the colony. He was a good one. And from there on, I don't think John Smith ever came back to the colony. Not that I know of, but they lived a new life there. Now, they call themselves America back in that time. And that is all I have for you for now. I'm going to give you my opinion, what I thought about this. What I thought about this story was, I liked it. It was pretty interesting. There were some parts that were really funny, and there was a lot of sad things that was happening. You know, the people that Elizabeth knew were dying, her friends, because during the winter times, that's when people were starting to get sick. And Pocahontas was not present there anymore because how the Indians were being enemies to everyone else there, and it was very hard times, and Elizabeth really wanted her to come there because Pocahontas knew what to do, the herbs, the spices, the medicines, everything. And I think later on they make peace with the Indians, and I really liked this book. It was very interesting. There is a movie about Elizabeth Baker. I didn't really see the whole thing, but to me, I thought it was pretty boring. And plus, they add stuff into the movie that it was not in according to the book. But I will see the movie again to see to give my personal opinion about it. But I really did like this book. This book was very interesting, and I really did like it. And I forgot to mention the first book of Dear America, Our Strange New World. I did like that one too. That one was a good book. And I do suggest these stories to your children, and it's good to learn about history, about our country. Yes, and I like this book. I do give a thumbs up and all that. That would be all for now. If you really like my videos, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you would like to see more, I will give more updates of my book review on my book club channel. And I do have a Facebook page for based on the book club. It's called Junior's Book Club on Facebook. Follow me on there, and I'll give you an update on the books that I have read so far. Bye, and have a good evening.